As many of you figured out with my omission of T. Higgins in last week's ranking, and I was right, by the way, my rankings will absolutely change depending on matchup. So there's going to be new faces on here today and old faces that are good players who are back in here today. Just make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support if you get value from the video today, because I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for Week 2 Fantasy Football. Starting out with our first tier, which is going to be Ja'Marr Chase back in first, and I've actually got Puka Nacua inside Tier 1 this week at the Tennessee Titans. So with Ja'Marr Chase, they're back at home in Cincinnati, and they're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I said this last week, that was going to be a tough matchup for Cleveland, and it ended up being exactly that. I actually had Ja'Marr Chase way too high ranked in my rankings. T. Higgins slightly outplayed him, but he didn't do much either. But this is a better matchup here. It's at home. They get to take on the Jags, who actually, ironically, looked pretty good against the Panthers. I kind of think it's just because the Panthers aren't very good. I think the Bengals will have one of those weeks where they start to turn it up offensively in Week 2 because, again, as I said last week as well, the Bengals are a historically slow starting team under Zach Taylor. I think they straighten some things out this week, and Ja'Marr gets back in the end zone. Puka Nacua at number 2 at the Tennessee Titans. First of all, I think the matchup is actually a little tougher than people may think. But last week, I had him not being as highly ranked, and he just proved how dominant he is. Like, Matt Stafford, when he is at quarterback, is going to hyper-target Puka Nacua, and it will be all down the field. Puka Nacua left the game for a little bit in Week 1 to get evaluated for a concussion, so he missed some time in that game, and he still posted a dominant fantasy game. Like, this is just a flat-out dominant possession and volume receiver in the NFL. So I just don't see how he's not in Tier 1 for me moving forward unless something drastic changes. And at number 3 to round out the tier, I've got CeeDee Lamb still versus the New York Giants. Now, CeeDee Lamb did not come up big for the Cowboys last week, and he should have had a much better day in fantasy football than he actually did. But CeeDee Lamb is still a top-tier talent in this league, and now he gets a much better matchup. Now, the irony of last week is that I thought the Giants would put up a really good fight against the Commanders, and I actually think their defense did pretty well for a while. But the bottom line is when you don't have an offense that can move the ball consistently, like the Giants don't, your defense is going to give up points. So the Giants are in this matchup on the road versus Dallas this week, a team that actually looked pretty good offensively. I expect CeeDee Lamb to have a much better game, to be much more focused, and I expect him to do much better than he did last week against this Giants defense. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Nico Collins at number 4 and Justin Jefferson at number 5. So with Nico, it actually is one of those situations again where I feel like just based on performance last week, if that's the way you're ranking people, Nico Collins should be nowhere near number 4. Nico was a huge disappointment versus the Los Angeles Rams. In fact, I think the whole Texans team was very concerning during that game because they could not protect CJ Stroud, and CJ did not particularly look great under pressure. Well, the good thing is they're back at home in Houston. That was a tough matchup in Los Angeles. It's on Sunday night. They're going to be mad and ready to go. And it is against a defense that's just inferior to the Los Angeles Rams. Therefore, I think Nico goes back to what we remember. We always are going to get targets with him. They're going to be down the field, and Nico will be explosive with those targets. So I just think they get kind of a break in this matchup right here, taking on a Tampa defense that I still don't think is very good. And Justin Jefferson at 5 versus the Atlanta Falcons. Look, this matchup is really good. I like the matchup a lot. But as I said all offseason, J.J. McCarthy did not look great. Now, I know people will come back at me in this one and say, what are you talking about? He came back and he won the game on Monday night. Dude, did you see him the first half? Like, he could not get the ball to anybody, let alone Justin Jefferson. I still don't believe that J.J. is going to be some, like, crazy, like, 10 catch for 100-yard type of guy, like Puka Nacua is, for example. JJ is going to have to do the most with what he gets, and I think that he will get the majority because if you look at last night, all of those targets were isolated to Justin Jefferson, basically. But still, at the end of the day, I still think that this guy is going to get like 5 catches for 80 yards and have to maximize everything. Now, being an elite player that he is, I will respect him enough to put him at number 5 against a weak matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown's at 6, and Malik Nabers is at 7 here. And listen, Amon-Ra also dealt with struggles in this Detroit offense without Ben Johnson, as I had alluded to for a while, and I can't believe people were fighting me on it. Like, Ben Johnson's a great offensive coordinator, and with him gone, they looked pretty bad against the Green Bay Packers. That being said, I think that this is a better situation here. Not that Chicago's defense is bad, but they have sustained plenty of injuries in that secondary to be vulnerable at this point. And I think Detroit comes back with a vengeance at home versus the Bears this week. So Amon-Ra St. Brown proved that he's still the top target in Detroit, and he's going to get all those targets. I think he bounces back this week. Malik Nabers at 7 at the Dallas Cowboys. Look, it's not lost on me that I may be overranking him still. Like, based on last week, I don't think that we can trust Russell Wilson to do much better than throwing 150 yards. Like, he didn't even, I don't think, get that versus the Washington Commanders. It is a Dallas defense that I still don't think is very good. While they had a decent showing against Philly in week 1, week 2, a lot of things can fall apart for teams. I think that week 2, Dallas' defense is weaker, and I think Malik Nabers is just so dominant, and he demands the target share, sort of like a Justin Jefferson situation, to where I'm going to have him still at 7, but I will tell you, it's still fluid. I could see him falling down into the following tier if he has another bad week because of Russell Wilson. And at number 8 to round out this tier, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Listen, I said this all offseason. Jackson Smith-Njigba was going to get peppered with work this year. It's very similar to Garrett Wilson in the Jets, except Sam Darnold's a better thrower of the football more consistently. Now, obviously, based on Fields' performance last year compared to Sam Darnold's, it's hard to say that. But this team is taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, the same team the Jets just whooped up on. And by the way, what a disgraceful showing from Mike Tomlin's defense. Something that he called historic before the season started. He should get barbecued for it, but he won't. But that's okay. That's what you have me for. To barbecue this historic defense right here, Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to do it all over again and get the same work that Garrett Wilson did last week, and I think have a great week 2 again versus the Pittsburgh Steelers defense in Pittsburgh. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Brian Thomas Jr. at number 9 and Mike Evans at number 10. Now, with Brian Thomas Jr., again, this is a guy, it's not lost to me, I might be overranking him. I was not as concerned last week about Brian Thomas Jr. because he was still getting work. Like, if you looked at his target share, he was still right there with Travis Hunter, but Travis Hunter was a factor, and he was a wide receiver first, as many people should understand. But this is a matchup, again, at Cincinnati that is very beatable right here. Cleveland had a lot of success throwing on them just a week ago. So I think Brian Thomas Jr. can have a bounce-back game. It's just a matter of Trevor Lawrence connecting with him, which kind of seems like a tall task, but I do still think that Brian Thomas Jr. is worthy inside the top 10 as of right now. Mike Evans at 10 at the Houston Texans. Look, Mike Evans last week was a little concerning, not because he looked bad particularly, but because Baker was inefficient and he was clunky last week. And I'll be honest, I have not gotten around to the Tampa-Atlanta game yet, so I haven't evaluated Mike as an individual player yet. But it makes me a little worried considering how well Egbuka did compared to Mike. So I've got Mike at 10 right now. It's a tough matchup. Derek Stingley is going to be following him around. So I think it's a little bit of a worse matchup this week. And I do think there's room for Egbuka to have another good game. Drake London's at 11 and Courtland Sutton is at 12. Now, Drake London is questionable already because he sustained a shoulder joint sprain in that loss versus Tampa Bay last week. Now, I called him a buy low player this week, and that, again, is going to be for future purposes. I still think of Drake London as a buy low player this week. I think injury actually factors into it because maybe he misses this game, right? I'm going to rank him at 11 for now because if he plays, I want him inside my lineup. This guy had 14 targets last week, and the only reason he didn't do as well is because Penix just couldn't hit him on all of those targets. But he's still the dominant, clear number 1 wide receiver. It's a matchup that I think is okay in Minnesota because Minnesota looked a little weak in the secondary last night. So I think Drake London, if he plays, is still a good player to play. Courtland Sutton's at 12, though. Listen, Sutton, as bad as Bo Nix looked, looked really good on all his work. Like, Sutton had a really good week against the Tennessee Titans last week. And the Indianapolis Colts as a team looked good last week. Look, I think a lot of things changes for a lot of teams in week 2. And we find out Indy's defense is not as dominant as we think. And Bo Nix is better than we think. I think Bo Nix has a bounce back week versus the Colts, and Sutton has the same level of upside, if not a little more, in this matchup versus the Colts. Emeka Egbuka is also in this tier, though, to round us out at 13, and he's taking on the Texans as well in Houston. That's the Sunday night game, and I think it's going to be a great game to watch, but again, Egbuka could easily outperform Mike Evans again. Now, Egbuka's usage was a little bit wonky in week 1, but that is just, I think, contributable to a week 1 situation. Rookie player, you don't exactly know what the targets are going to break down like, but I think he proved himself. Like, he proved how good of a player he is. 2 touchdowns on 4 catches. And also, I think it's a matchup that could benefit Egbuka if he is not being tailed by Derek Stingley this week. I think Derek Stingley, if he follows around Mike Evans, there's going to be plenty more opportunities for Egbuka to shine in this performance. That's why I've got him inside of tier 3 right now. I think he's a really good player this week. And at this point, a must play on your roster. And listen, I understand that Emeka Egbuka is one of those guys that it's hard to play over certain other guys. It's definitely going to be a workaround situation on some rosters. But if you want my advice on how to build your roster moving forward, trades to make, waiver pickups to make, lineup decisions, I will break down your full team when you join the premium tier subscription on fsroundup.com. So what you could do is go to fsroundup.com, join the premium tier subscription, where you will not only be able to get my team breakdown for you after the 12-day free trial ends, you'll also get access to my top 260 rankings on a weekly basis, and you'll also get access to the automatic waiver wire tool, which is going to save people's teams in 2025. So it's a great deal. We're giving it out because we love you guys, and you guys have been great to us so far. So to get a full team breakdown, go to FS Roundup, sign up for the premium subscription, and I will break down your team when you email it to us after your 12-day free trial is over. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got A.J. Brown at 14 and Deebo Samuel at 15. Looky here, Deebo Samuel. A.J. Brown, I am putting him here because I want in on this matchup. Listen, A.J. Brown was very concerning last week. He was very much virtually invisible for that whole game on Thursday night. Now, I don't know if it was because he was dealing with injury leading up to this game for basically a month, or it's because Philly is starting to just lose interest in targeting A.J. Brown, but it was definitely less targets for a reason. Like, I don't know what that reason was, but I can tell you this. A.J. Brown is one of those players I've got my eye on in a bad way right now. But again, I will cut him some slack because I do think that A.J. Brown is a player that you want in on just because of matchup right here. And we just know historically A.J. Brown is one of those players that will come back and give you a 30-point week after a complete bust of a game the week before. So A.J. Brown, I've got him at 14, but I've got my eye on this one big time. And looky here. Deebo Samuel makes it to 15 after being mocked and ridiculed all offseason and in week 1 for putting Deebo Samuel well above consensus. It should show you 2 things. Number 1, I was right about Deebo Samuel, and there's a lot of yahoos out there who owe me an apology on this one. But that's okay. I won't gloat too much more about it. But the other thing is that you should see a lot of fantasy creators out there are just completely BSing rankings based on what they see across the community because they don't want to take the grief for it. I'm okay with taking the grief. Deebo Samuel was a gut call for me, and it paid off in week 1 alone. Now he goes to Green Bay against the Green Bay tough defense on Thursday night. And while I do think it is a tough spot on Thursday night, I think Washington's offense is just one of those you have to have players in because of Jaden Daniels and the effectiveness of Cliff Kingsbury running the offense. Deebo was much better and much more involved than Terry McLaurin. And I do think that will even out at some point, but I still think we're in this really beautiful window where Deebo Samuel is a top-tier player and a wide receiver 2 on your roster at this point. Ladd McConkey's at 16 and DK Metcalf is at 17. Now, Ladd McConkey dropped down in my rankings, and I said this after the game on Friday night. I'm going to drop him moving forward because one of my concerns when they signed Keenan Allen back was that Keenan would start to take more of third down throws that were going to be clutch moments that Justin Herbert needed from a wide receiver, even if it was just to get 3 yards or something like that. So I hadn't really put too much stock into Keenan's impact on Ladd before the season started, but he definitely proved the chemistry that they had together on Friday night in key moments against the Kansas City Chiefs. Therefore, Ladd had to move down. Now, if you look at Ladd's usage last week, it was still top tier. Like, this is not a guy that you can just plummet in your rankings because of that night, but I will say he had to move down. In this matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders, it could be a get-right game, so it could be an underranking, but I feel comfortable having him here at 16. DK Metcalf is at 17. He moved up for multiple reasons. Number one, as a Steelers fan with Jack Lambert as my witness, I loved watching functional quarterback play for the first time in this offense since Big Ben. It was awesome to see. So refreshing. And number two, it gives DK Metcalf and even Calvin Austin viability as good wide receiver plays. DK Metcalf was the most effective, obviously, in the offense, and he's also the number one target. So versus Seattle's defense, I think it's a revenge game for him, and I do think that DK Metcalf will get the ball plenty force-fed to him to fulfill that type of vengeance game that he will definitely have against Seattle this week. So he's at 17, up way higher than last week. And T. Higgins at 18 to round up this tier. Yeah, you remember him. Everybody thought I forgot to rank him, or you thought I was crazy for not ranking him. Turns out I was right, because T. Higgins was not good last week. But again, I said this with Jamar. I think it's a bounce-back game for this offense. At home versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, a defense that looked better than they are last week because the Panthers just flat out aren't that good. The Bengals start slow, but they start to pick it up as time goes. I think this could be a kickstart my heart type of game for the Bengals. And if that's the case, obviously you want T. Higgins on your roster in the lineup somewhere. I do think T. Higgins has a resurgent game in Week 2 fantasy football. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Ricky Pearsall at 19 and Zay Flowers at number 20. The reason I've got him ranked above Zay is because with Zay Flowers, you do still have to factor in that this offense will go a lot of runs at times to where Zay will not be as involved. And I think this is one of those games, and I'll get more into it. But Ricky Pearsall is, like, without question, the wide receiver one in the offense, if nothing else, for lack of depth. They're dropping like flies already in San Francisco. George Kittle's down. He's going to miss several weeks. Jawan Jennings, he's probably going to miss a couple weeks as well. What else do they have? Like, Ricky Pearsall is going to be so important in this offense. It's a matchup you can trust against the New Orleans Saints. I don't see how Ricky is not consistently inside the top 25 at this point. This might be a little too low. And it might be low for Zay, but I will say again, game script will matter in this one. Versus the Cleveland Browns, I don't trust the game script because Zay will be in a position to where I think they'll come back with a vengeance this week at home and crush the Browns. So I don't think there will be much use for a player like Zay Flowers like there was against the Buffalo Bills to keep pace and to pace them in points scored. I think they're going to be able to win this game 24-6 pretty easy against the Browns and therefore make Zay pretty much unusable by the time the third or fourth quarter hits. That's why he's at 20. But just for the record, I loved watching Zay have a great week last week because I was also a player I was well above consensus on this offseason. Ted McMillan's at 21 and Marvin is at 22. That's going to be an interesting one to talk about. Ted McMillan is at 21 at the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, last week didn't go as I planned. I thought he was going to be a must-start play last week. And listen, he wasn't bad. Ted McMillan did prove that he's the clear number one. He will be their only valuable target at this point in this offense. But the bottom line is that this Panthers offense is just not that good still. Like, Bryce Young is still not that good of a quarterback to supply great fantasy options as pass catchers. Arizona's defense also was more disappointing last week than I expected. So in all different forms, this one could get weird. Ted could be too low ranked or he could be properly ranked here. But I will say this. Ted proved enough last week that he will be the wide receiver one on this team and therefore has a spot inside the top 30. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 22 versus the Panthers. Same matchup, basically. Like, it's a good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. And I will say this. Marvin looked better on a per-touch basis than he did last year. The way he executed on all of his targets last week basically was so much better than we saw last year from Marvin. But I will say, they're using him very, very similar to how they used him. Last week showed me a lot. And while they really didn't have the blowout game that I thought they would, they had plenty of passing situations. And Marvin still wasn't used that much. I'm worried about Marvin. I think this could be a good sell high opportunity for Marvin. And while I do think he's still a fine player, and I think he took the leap as a player himself, the offense just still is not catered for him. So I'm worried about him in week 2 and really moving forward. And it's someone I think could be a sell high player. Davante Adams is at 23 to round out this tier, and he is at the Tennessee Titans this week. Now, again, Puka Nacua is easy the number 1 in this offense, and by far there's a tier gap between him and Davante. But I will say, Davante Adams still had 8 targets in that game versus the Houston Texans, and he was going to be a good player at the red zone against teams. It could be as soon as this week versus the Tennessee Titans, because he will get a lot of key targets in the red zone. So I still don't think you can put Davante Adams outside the top 30, but I definitely am not as big on him this week as I was heading into week 1. Dropping down to our next tier, Keon Coleman at 24 and Terry McLaurin at 25. Keon Coleman, guys, let me just tell you, Keon Coleman was awesome in week 1. And if you looked at his usage, he was not only the most targeted player in that high-flying matchup, he was on the field the most before Khalil Shakir, who I was a player that I was high on. I might be wrong on this one. Keon Coleman looks like he's legitimately having a breakout year. And I have said this consistently. You want a wide receiver in Buffalo's offense. They will throw the ball more this year. Bottom line, you want a wide receiver obviously attached to Josh Allen. And if this was real, if it was real, this is too low. 24 is too low. We will find out more this week versus the Jets defense, who I think is good, but at the same time, I think that they're going to crush the Jets this week. So it may not be a full picture type of game that we'll get this year, but I will say this. If Keenan's breakout is real, he's too low at 24. But I've got him here for now because it's still a newer thing. Terry McLaurin at 25 at the Green Bay Packers. Listen, I think that as the weeks go on and Terry gets back on the field more, he will become a more valuable fantasy option. But I said this all offseason when he was missing time. I don't like the fact that he's missing time. He's missing getting his body in football shape. So it was not a secret and no wonder to me when he didn't post a good fantasy game against the Giants. Green Bay this week is a tough matchup. It's on a short week on Thursday night. So I still don't think it's an ideal situation for Terry, but I think he'll be more involved this week than he was last week and so forth every week moving forward. Garrett Wilson at 26 and Hollywood Brown is at 27. Now with Garrett Wilson, he's taking on the Bills and that's a matchup I honestly don't think is as tough as I once originally thought. I do think that the Bills could be a beatable matchup this week. And listen, Garrett Wilson, if Justin Fields can play the way he played against the Steelers every single week, Garrett Wilson's way too low ranked. But that's just the point. Like, I don't think that Justin Fields is that player. I think the Steelers' defense is just that bad. And I also think that Garrett Wilson, while he will be peppered with targets without question for the duration of 2025, I still don't think I can see him being that dominant of a player in fantasy on a week-to-week basis. If Justin Fields can't be the quarterback, I still don't think he is. Now, Hollywood Brown at 27 to round out this tier versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, matchup you want in on. Philly's defense is tough, but you do want options in this one. And I will say this, with Hollywood Brown, it's just a player I don't particularly like. But again, I may have him too low ranked here just because if Xavier Worthy misses this game, and you'll notice Worthy was not in these rankings because I don't think he will play. I could have him too low ranked though, because Hollywood's volume last week was through the roof. Like, he will definitely be involved. It's just not a player I particularly trust. And against a defense like Philly, who is better than the Los Angeles Chargers, I just don't know if I could put him much higher than this. But I will say one of the most valuable pickups on the waiver wire this week, and a player that probably should go right into your starting lineup. Dropping down to our last tier, Jacoby Myers is at 28 and Travis Hunter is at 29. Jacoby Myers versus the Los Angeles Chargers, tougher matchup still. But listen, this Vegas offense is an offense you want pass catchers in. Geno Smith is still that same guy who can get 300 passing yards per game and provide serious upside to fantasy pass catching options. So with Brock Bowers, obviously we know he's going to be great. He got shaken up a little bit, and Jacoby Myers is still the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I think moving forward, he's probably going to have to be inside the top 30 from now on, and honestly, it just may be too low of a ranking for him. Now, Travis Hunter at 29 at the Cincinnati Bengals, again, the matchup is really strong, and if you just look at his usage last week, he was used basically just as much as Brian Thomas Jr., both in the passing game as far as targets and just being on the field with offensive snaps. He was definitely right there with him. But I still do think that it could be one of those weeks they try to get Brian Thomas Jr. more involved, and Travis Hunter is not as great in fantasy because they will put more emphasis on BTJ this week. Could be an oversight. I could have him too low ranked, but I've got him here at 29 for now. And Calvin really makes his way back into the top 30. Now, I still don't think this is a great matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams. Houston struggled with this defense last week. And I think Tennessee is in a tough situation again with their rookie quarterback. Now, it is at home, which does change the game a little bit for them. But the Rams defense will give Cam Ward trouble. And if he looks similar to what he looked like in week 1, Calvin's going to have a tough time being able to execute because while he doesn't have the matchup at corner like he did versus Pat Surtain, he still is in a position to where you have to acknowledge the fact that this rookie quarterback is not doing him any favors. So let me know what you think of the rankings in week 2 fantasy football. And if you want to see the buy low trade targets to acquire before week 2, click on this video right here.